4:30 in the morning, October 16th, 1793. Cell number 280, the Conciergerie prison, Paris. A woman asks for a pen and paper. She's just been sentenced. In less than 8 hours, shall be executed. There's almost no time left, but she isn't sleeping. She's writing a letter. She's not writing to her husband. He's already dead. She's not writing to her son. He was taken from her months ago. She's writing to a woman who may never read a single word of it. And she won't. The letter gets intercepted that same day. For the next 20-some years, it sits in someone else's archive, buried among the papers of a man who will send thousands more people to the guillotine before ending up there himself. We already know how this day ends. But that's not really the question here. The question is, why does a person who has lost everything spend her final hours on a letter that will probably never be read? Why do people sentenced to death almost always try to write or say something in their final hours, even when the odds that anyone will ever hear it are close to zero? Why did the Revolutionary Tribunal need to destroy not just this woman's body, but her image, cutting her hair, changing her clothes, binding her hands so tightly it struck witnesses as excessive, even by the standards of the day? Why did a crowd that hated her as a symbol show up to watch her die? And what actually happens to people in the moment of a public execution? And the biggest question of all, what's left of a person once you strip away the title, the children, the name, the voice, and all that remains is 1 hour of control over your own ending? A little over 3 months earlier, at the Temple prison, 8-year-old Louis Charles was pulled from her arms in the middle of the night. He was handed over to a shoemaker named Simon, who would later write a report accusing the boy's mother of something obscene. The handwriting on the signed confession is shaky, uneven, like a child writing under pressure. On the second day of the trial, the prosecutor, Fouquier-Tinville, reads that accusation out loud in open court. It's the worst charge of the entire proceeding. The room waits for her reaction. Marie Antoinette says nothing. One of the jurors demands she respond directly. So she stands up, and she says the line that stops the room cold. If she hasn't answered, it's only because nature itself refuses to answer a charge like that against a mother. And she appeals to every mother in the room to understand why. This wasn't a moment of desperate improvisation. The British psychiatrist John Bowlby, studying children forcibly separated from their mothers by war and hospitalization, found something consistent. That kind of forced rupture triggers a predictable psychological response in both people: protest, and right behind it, an attempt to regain some kind of control, even symbolic control, over what's been lost. Marie Antoinette had no way to get her son back. What she had was the ability to say the truth out loud in front of witnesses one last time. For a second, the room actually flinches, but the verdict was decided before she ever walked into that courtroom. The only thing left for her to decide is how she's going to spend whatever hours she has left. People on death row are stripped of almost everything, but not always of one thing. A few minutes alone with paper, that's exactly what Marie Antoinette asks for. The American criminologist Robert Johnson interviewed death row inmates in Alabama back in 1978 for what became his book Condemned to Die, published in 1981. What he found was a dominant psychological state in those final hours: powerlessness, fear, a kind of emotional numbness setting in. But his research also pointed to the one thing that seemed to soften that state even a little: holding on to some small personal act of control. Choosing your own last words. Choosing what you do with the time you have left. Control over something small stands in for the control over everything else that's already gone. She writes to Madame Elizabeth, her husband's sister. She asks her to look after her daughter, to forgive her son for what he was forced to say, to never hold it against him. And one line in that letter says more than any description could. "My God, have mercy on me." I have no more tears left to cry for you, my poor children. Farewell, farewell. She has no idea the letter will never reach her. Tonight, whether it arrives doesn't matter to her. What matters is that she got to say it. But in less than 2 hours, they're coming back for her, and the first thing they take from her won't be her life, it'll be her face. At 6 in the morning, the cell door opens again. She's ordered to take off the black mourning dress she's worn since her husband's death and put on a plain white shift, the kind commoners wore to the scaffold. They cut her hair. They bind her hands so tightly the rope cuts into her skin, a detail witnesses would later describe as needlessly cruel, even by the standards of that morning. None of this was necessary to make the blade do its job. The philosopher Michel Foucault, in his historical analysis of public execution in Europe, and it's worth being clear, this isn't a clinical study or an experiment, it's a work of historical and archival analysis, argued that the ritual before an execution almost never exists just to kill the body. Its real function is to erase the condemned person's former status in front of an audience and replace it with something degrading before the final blow ever lands. Killing the Queen wasn't enough for the tribunal. They needed the crowd to see something that no longer looked like a queen at all. She doesn't fight any of it. The only thing she asks for is a minute alone, behind a screen, to change. They refuse her even that. A few minutes later, she hears the same words said to everyone who walks out those doors that morning. Time. And the only thing left from her old life is knowing how to walk with her spine straight. She's about to have to prove that one more time, not in a cell, but in front of all of Paris. The cart ride takes a little over an hour. Along Rue Saint-Honoré, thousands of people line the street, many of them the same women who, years earlier, marched on Versailles demanding bread. Some hurl insults, others just stare, unable to look away. The psychologist Colton Scrivener, in a 2021 study that became the basis for what's now called the morbid curiosity scale, found something that reframes this entirely. Our pull towards someone else's. Catastrophe isn't a sign of cruelty. It's an ancient mechanism for gathering information about danger, cranked up to its absolute limit during moments of collective upheaval. The crowd at the scaffold wasn't necessarily hungry for this one woman's blood. They wanted to see, with their own eyes, that the old order was really, truly gone. Climbing the steps to the scaffold, hands still bound, she accidentally steps on the executioner's foot, and she says her last words, not a scream, not a plea. Forgive me, I didn't mean to. A minute later, it's over. The letter she wrote at 4:30 that morning never made it to Madame Elizabeth. It was seized the day of her execution and filed away with the case against her. It sat there for more than 20 years, outlasting the tribunal that seized it and the revolution that created that tribunal, until it finally surfaced and was published in the following century, long after anyone it was meant for was still alive to read it. And that's the answer to the question we started with. She wasn't writing so the letter would arrive. She was writing because on the one night when they'd taken her title, her children and her tomorrow, there was still one thing nobody could take from her early. The chance to say what she needed to say while she still had a pen in her hand. The guillotine took her life a few hours after the ink dried. But what she managed to write before dawn outlived the tribunal, outlived the revolution, and outlived the man who hid that letter away, hoping no one would ever read it.